Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. So behind me is my Arctic Fox truck camper, and I've got another project I'm going to do tonight, at least get started on it, and it's to install a slide topper awning. That's the awning right there in a big cardboard protective tube. The rest of my parts are in this box. There's two of these brackets. These attach to the end of the awning roller, and then they attach to two brackets that are bolted to the slide out. So these are those two brackets right here. A few months ago I went to the local Arctic Fox dealer and took some pictures on how the awning is mounted. And here's one of the pictures that I taped to the wall. So it butts up against this corner piece, and then it lines up with the bottom of this big plastic trim piece. So you might be able to see where I've marked my holes. And then I'll use a small center punch to punch right exactly where I want the drill to start. And then our other bracket goes down there at that end, right above that refrigerator vent. Looking closely here, you can see that I've got my holes punched out with a center punch. And this trim piece is actually aluminum. I didn't realize that it was aluminum. I thought it was plastic. So next we'll go ahead and drill those out. I'm going to start with a 7/64 inch drill bit here. This is looking from the top down. Drill through the outer trim piece, through the wall, and then I'm hitting a piece of the aluminum framework. Once I go through that, then I'm into wood. Once I get into the wood, then I stop. Okay, that's all the way through the aluminum trim piece. That's through the wall and probably hitting the piece of aluminum framework. And now I'm into wood. So I'll pull the drill bit out. So let's take a look here. That's a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for this one. And then I'll come back with a larger drill bit and drill out just the very outer portion of this hole, which essentially is just this piece of trim work. And this white stuff here, that's some of the wall material and maybe some sealant that's behind this piece of aluminum trim work. And the idea behind this is so that I can get this screw in a lot easier and get it started. Because this piece of trim work, it's probably about 1/8 to maybe close to 3/16 of an inch thick. You can kind of see how far that screw goes in. That's about the thickness of this piece of trim. And there's a front-on shot of all the holes. They aren't quite exactly where they should be. My 3 middle holes are good, but my 2 end holes are not quite perfect. I could actually drill out the 2 end holes on this bracket just a little bit bigger. Really, that one should be fine. This is the one that I'm most concerned about. My drill press is actually right here next to my truck camper, so I did go ahead and drill out 3 of the holes. The one on the end, the one in the middle, and the one on the other end. So that looks a lot better. I've gooped a little bit of sealant in each of the holes, and then I've done something similar on the back side of the bracket. I went around the perimeter of the bracket with some sealant and then around the perimeter of each hole. So we'll flip this around and then we'll get busy installing it. I've got all 5 screws started, so a 5/16 socket on a 1/4 inch ratchet, and I'll tighten all those up. On that last screw that I haven't tightened down yet, you can see that I smeared a little bit more sealant right below where the screw head will be, and then on these others you can see how that sealant oozed out as I tightened up the screw. The screws kind of feel like they're stripping out as you're driving them in place, and that's probably because of the self-drilling nature of the very tip of the screw is biting into the aluminum framework as well as the wood inside of that aluminum framework. And then taking a closer look, once you have all the screws tightened, you can see how along the bottom here sealant oozed out. Same thing on this side, and same thing across the top. I've got my holes drilled for the second bracket. I used a little bit different technique for center punching them, and that worked out a lot better. So they're all lined up much better than the first bracket. So I'll go ahead and apply some sealant to the holes into the back of the bracket, and then we'll go ahead and screw it down in place. As you tighten this screw, you can kind of hear it make some nasty noises as the self-drilling tip bites in through some of that aluminum framework. For starters, I'm just running them in snug. You can see how I've smeared some sealant around the threads. And then I'll come back and give each one its final tightening. And I think that should do it. And here's what the brackets look like from down below. So I've got the parts laid out here on the floor. This big piece is the rail. It screws to the wall above the slide out. A little rubber strip at the top of the awning slides into this track, and I've actually got this oriented backwards. This will be the bottom. Here's my slide topper awning right here, and here's that little rubber strip. It's sewn into the fabric. And so what we want to do is cut this just a little bit longer than the actual awning. Well, you can see that the little rubber strip is about 1 inch longer. It's about 1 inch longer on each end. I can buy this awning track in 8-foot or 16-foot lengths, and I bought the 16 because I needed more than 8. My awning is about 9 feet long. So what we're going to do first is go ahead and measure the awning, and then measure this awning rail, cut it to length, place it up on the top of the slide out up there on the wall, and mark where my holes are going to be drilled. It's going to be mounted right below this rail. This is the original gutter rail. And I upgraded to stainless steel screws all the way across here, and I'm installing a new piece of plastic trim in that. From one end of the rubber strip to the other, it's 9 feet exactly. After I have this cut, then I'll take a small file and deburr the ends here, and then we'll also spread this little gap open just a little bit so that it's easier to slide the end of the awning into it. So my technique to drill the holes, I've drilled my first one, going to hold the track in place, then I'm going to install a screw in there to hold it in place, and then go down the line and drill my next holes. And about every third or fourth hole I'll install a screw to hold the track in place as I drill. And show you how I drill the holes. There, I'm through the fiberglass, and now go a little bit further and we'll be through the aluminum framing. And there we are. And let's do one more. After I have all of the holes drilled, what I'm going to do is take one screw, run it into the hole and get my threads started. And I am not using the stainless steel screws that I'll ultimately install in here. The stainless is a little bit softer and it might snap off as I'm trying to create those threads in the aluminum framing. So I'm using one of the old screws that I removed out of the upper rail. And we'll go ahead and repeat that process for the rest of the holes. After I've drilled all of the holes in the wall, then it's time to install some sealant on the back of the awning rail. I've applied the sealant to the entire length of the awning rail, and I've also squirted some sealant in each of the holes. And on the wall above the slide out, I've squirted some sealant in each of the holes in the wall as well. Position the rail in place. I will also squirt just a little bit of sealant on the outside of these screw holes. Partway through this process, I've changed my technique on installing the screws because running the nut driver by hand on all of the screws was kind of getting a little bit painful. So I'm starting the screws by hand and then using my DeWalt drill with a 1/4-inch nut driver installed to mostly finish the screws all the way. It does just require a little bit of extra care and caution not to overdrive the screws and snap one of them off. So I have the clutch set fairly light. And we're done. My hand's kind of sore right in through here from gripping that nut driver. You can see how it's pretty red. So after the sealant dries, I'll come back through and install the little plastic insert. And I'll do that up here as well. This would be a lot easier with 2 people. The instructions say to spray some silicone into that track, but in the case of this awning and this particular track, it slides in just fine. I have it slid down as far towards the back as it'll go. This is the front, and it looks like we've got about 3 inches of overhang. And looks like we've got about the same down at that end. So the next step is to install the end caps and then mount them to the brackets. Once you have the awning slid into the track, then what I did was roll this awning and positioned it up on top of the roof. And then I ran my slide all the way in, and then each of the end brackets, I slid those into place onto the bracket that's on the wall. And the next step, I've already installed the awning roller in the other end bracket. And what we're going to do down at this end is this is the end that has the spring in it, and this little pin secures the spring and keeps tension on it. There's those two end rollers, guide rollers is what they're called. Those line up with a slot in that end cap, so I'll get that aligned and slide the end cap in place. Once my end cap is in place, then I will install the screw in the end here. The screw is this little shoulder screw. Prior to installing the awning onto the end caps, we want to make sure that the awning is rolled up tight and all of the slack is gone. The instructions don't call for this, but I'm going to install just a little bit of thread lock compound on each of these two shouldered screws. And we leave this orange pin in place. What that does, this orange pin, it leaves a gap between the ends of those two guide rollers and the end cap. And it'll give some space for everything to float back and forth. And once we pull this out, then it has a little bit more free play. Next, what we'll do is verify that the awning is centered on the slide out. So right there you can see that the fabric is pretty close to being even with the front edge of the slide out. We'll walk here to the back and we're about the same. One other thing that the instructions indicate to verify is that the spring, it's kind of hard to see it, but it's that little pointed shaped piece right there. I want to make sure that that end of it is above that roller, and I've already verified that on both ends, and this shows that it is above that roller. So before we mount the bracket to the wall bracket, we'll tap this and make sure that it's tight up against the roller tube. The screws used to secure the roller tube bracket to the wall bracket, they are self-drilling screws, but I'm going to go ahead and drill holes instead. Makes it a lot easier to get those screws started and threaded into place. Before we drill the holes, I want to tap this to make sure everything is tight. And then we can also install this little cap. It's got 3 tabs on it. One of the tabs faces up. And I can go ahead and pull these little orange tabs out. And the next thing to do also is roll the tube back just a little bit so that pin lines up with that slot, and then we can pull that pin out. When we pull that pin out, that allows the spring to tension the awning. Only real issue I see is that the awning actually slopes back towards the camper some. The reason for that is this track, this awning rail that I installed, technically is a little bit too low. It really should have been up here where the existing gutter rail is. And I thought about that before I installed this down here. But I just didn't want to go to all of the work of breaking this factory seal here, cutting this piece to length to get rid of what I didn't need and then to reinstall. And the other thing too is that this new track, the holes didn't line up with the existing holes of this old original gutter. So I just determined it was way more work than I wanted to tackle to try to relocate or to locate this up here. In a perfect world, the factory would have used the style of track, trim piece, whatever, gutter that had the built-in awning rail, because there is a piece of aluminum extrusion made that has a gutter and then also has the awning rail, track, slot, whatever you want to call it, built in, so it's all one piece. Everything looks good as far as the operation, so I'll clean everything up and put all my tools away. And you can see that I've gone all the way through. Whoops. Well, that is really messed up. I just broke a drill bit. Success! I got the drill bit out. I drilled this hole big enough to match the threads of the screw. That basically just made the hole bigger so that I could get my needle nose pliers in there and grab hold of the tip of the drill bit. And this is exactly how little of it I got a hold of, and once I got a hold of it good, it just pulled right out. Just need to be more careful next time I drill all of the other holes.